25 miles per hour. So not terribly fast, but it's certainly not, moving slowly. Now, if you are up in Mount Herman, Sunny Hill, Mount Herman is going to be right in here. That is, you're getting a lot of heavy rain. You're probably getting some gusty winds, and you might be getting a little pea-sized hail, especially where you have these brighter pinks. That's going to be that hail that is possible. So from Sunny Hill over towards the Mount Herman area, that's where we're watching for threats that perhaps not tornadic, but definitely some wind gusts and some very heavy rainfall and hail. That rotation is going to be right in there. Now, if you're in Kentwood, if you're over towards I-55, Amite, Tangipahoa, it's possible that your cell phones are going off. The cell phone towers are probably, you're close enough to this warning to where you might be hearing your phones go off. The tornado threat is east of you on I-55. So anywhere on I-55, you're going to be safe, and we're going to give you the all clear for.
There's also a new severe thunderstorm warning just west of Tangi.
Okay, so there's a new severe thunderstorm warning that has also been issued for, oh, I see what you're talking about, for going right down here in St. Helena. Is this St. Helena? Yeah. So moving out of St. Helena, going to be moving off towards Amite. So this is a completely different cell, and this one could try to rotate too. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that. And I'm going to tell you, you could see once it starts to get this more of a notch feature on the back side or on this side of it, it could try to rotate. But we'll keep an eye on that. But if you are in Amite, anywhere from Amite up through the north, we need to be watching this cell. Right now, I'm assuming it's warned for 60-mile-per-hour winds, Chris, if I had to guess. Yeah, so it is also warned until 1:45, that severe thunderstorm, and that is going to be moving. It's near Greensburg right now, but it's going to be heading toward parts of Amite and up through Tangipahoa, the parish and the community up here along I-55. So that will be there in probably the next 10 minutes or so, and that will be a damaging wind threat right now, but could try to rotate. So we need to be ready for our tornado safe spot north of Hammond towards Amite. If you're, what is it in here? Amite, Tangipahoa. And you can see it's got some broad rotation right now, but as it gets closer to our radar, we'll get a better idea of exactly what it looks like closer to the surface. Now, this is our tornado warning. This one, these are our two. You see that one back there. This is our one forward heading towards Franklinton. We're still thinking it's going to get there in the next 15 minutes or so, 15 to 20 minutes, closer to 150. The rotation, it's not impressive. I'm, not seeing clear indications of a tight couplet, meaning it clearly looks like a tornado is on the ground. We're not seeing that with radar, but the tornado warning has been issued. We want you to take these serious. And up here on the North Shore in Washington Parish, whether you live in Franklinton or west of Franklinton in Washington Parish, you do need to be in your tornado safe spot. And you can see they've just updated that warning, so they're going to trim it down some. This is the old warning. This is your new tornado warning. You can see the box there. It still includes Franklinton and going south of Franklinton. So if you live on Highway 25 south of Franklinton in Washington Parish, you need to be in your tornado safe spot. If you live along Highway 16 southwest of town in Franklinton, you need to be in your tornado safe spot, as this is the area of rotation that we're going to be watching move into now out of Tangipahoa Parish into Washington Parish, and then we're watching that one behind it as well. That tornado warning is going to go until 2:30 a.m. You can see here some of your communities, Richardson, Franklinton, Stony Point, Jenkins, and anywhere south of Jenkins, or if you live anywhere in here in Washington Parish, that's where we're going to be watching for that potential tornado, that rotation moving across the parish there. Chris is going to go ahead and put a track on this for us, and a few things popping up, give you a timeline, getting closer to Richardson, Franklinton between 1:50 and 2 o'clock. It'll be closer to the Riverside Medical Center, of course, in Franklinton at about 2 o'clock as well. So that's just giving you a general timeline on when the worst part, that rotating part of the storm, more than likely the strongest winds are going to be heading closer to the city of Franklinton. So you have about 15 more minutes. You don't need to wait that long. You need to go ahead and go in your tornado safe spot. Remember what that means. It's going to mean the interior part of a sturdy structure, mobile homes, trailers, tents, none of that cuts it in a tornado. You don't even want to be in that during a thunderstorm with a strong wind. So you need to be in a sturdy structure away from windows. Put as many walls between you and the outside as possible, and you'll be safe from this as long as you're inside a sturdy structure and also the lowest level. So that's where you need to be if you live anywhere in this red flashing polygon. Chris, let's go ahead and look at that other cell. I want to just take a look at it as it's starting to move closer into
Yeah, I'm here as well, Peyton.
Oh, great.
Yeah, just to kind of give you a little bit of a break here. It looks like that other cell, the rotation seems to be very, very, not even broad, just really unorganized. And it's this area that Peyton is pointing out on north of Hillsdale at the moment. Doesn't look like that is nearly as well defined as the one in eastern Tangipahoa Parish near Wilmer and moving kind of just to the north of Stony Point. And it looks like just about ready to cross the parish line into Washington Parish. This one a far better sample of sampling of what may be a better defined rotation. Again, what we've been reporting on is all radar indicated. That means that this has not been spotter identified. There has been no one that has actually seen a tornado necessarily, but we're looking at radar indicated rotation. And sometimes if that rotation is able to make its way down to the surface, then you could easily have a tornado. And it's always better to err on the side of caution within these storms. Again, where that rotation is embedded within some very intense rainfall. As a matter of fact, some of the more intense rains are just to the north of that, kind of south of Mount Herman. You see the reflectivity colors there of the purple. That is some intense rain moving east toward Clifton in Washington Parish, and then that is going to bring in some of the heavy rainfall. You're certainly see some strong gust with that, but the tornado threat, the rotation, is just south of where you see the more intense reflectivity in this area that is just on the western end of this polygon. And you did see, you may have seen just a few minutes ago, a new polygon added to the screen there. The National Weather Service has kind of shrunk the warning size as the storm continues moving toward the east. So we will gradually see this polygon size shrink in size as the storm continues moving to the east. And as we get these new frames here on radar, I kind of like to continue to sample the velocities. Still that broad circulation showing up, as Peyton even noted.
I think it looks like that rear flow is coming. It looks like it's more bowing out now and your inflow's here. So it's certainly not as organized as it was.
And you know, it's one of those, we can kind of question it on air as we're sampling it, but as the Weather Service folks, and they know what they're doing, they always want to err on the side of caution. And if they see rotation that may be trying to make its way down to the surface, they are almost always going to issue a tornado warning. I'm not sure the exact percentages of what storms are warned and which ones actually do develop a tornado, but it's always better to err on the side of caution. And something that Peyton had mentioning during the earlier newscast, and I know at noon, is that these certainly would have the potential of developing some rotation and possibly developing a tornado. As a matter of fact, the Weather Service is saying that they're going to send up one of their weather balloons shortly to kind of get a better sample of the environment that is now moving across the North Shore and will continue moving south toward the metro area later this afternoon and evening to see if there is going to be a higher chance of severe weather. There was always a little bit more of a chance for severe storms with this line on the North Shore than in the metro area, but sometimes those colors, those dividing lines are almost useless. We're all going to have that same threat for some severe weather as we continue through the rest of the afternoon and evening. It does look like that chance may be a little bit more elevated for the North Shore, and certainly we have seen that so far over the last hour or so.
Yeah, Chris, I guess let's zoom out real quick, because the overall line, this was with that cold front, right? It is now coming together. It's kind of merging. So this line of storms extends all the way back to Baton Rouge now, and it's kind of all come together. And this is what we're going to be watching sweep across us. So yeah, we're going to have to keep an eye on all these individual cells to make sure they don't try to rotate. They could, and we could get these quick spin up tornadoes. But currently the two main ones we're watching are in Tangipahoa and Washington. That's the tornado warned one. But we do have the one right behind it that has shown some broad rotation as well. This is going to be closer to Amy, and I could tell you just looking at it, Chris, you could tell it's starting to get more of that classic look to it, maybe a little bit of a hook. So this is certainly something that they've issued a severe thunderstorm warning with a tornado possible tag, just to indicate that it's trying to rotate, and at any moment they could update it to a tornado warning. We'll just have to wait and see what they think. But that's where that rotation is. It's going to be crossing I-55 pretty soon, and this is more than likely going to stay just north of Amy, and they probably just updated that severe thunderstorm warning for that cell as it moves closer and closer.
Yeah, they're just continuing the warning they're expiring it for St. Helena, and it's going to continue for Tangi and Washington until 2:30. That's for the severe thunderstorm warning, the tornado warning north of that. a little bit different time frame. As again, what we're looking at here, it's kind of an algorithm that the radar runs looking at potential rotation within the storm, and you clearly see the area that is warned for a tornado northeast of Wilmer, north of Stony Point. Radar is indicating the potential for some rotation there, and then they're also looking at maybe some small rotation as we saw that storm that is just now moving across more central Tangipahoa, north of Amite. That will continue toward kind of the Holton area over the next, say, 15, 20, 25 minutes or so. Weather Service also saying they're watching some of the storms that are moving through St. Helena as we speak. Not looking severe at the moment, but as they also said, they're starting to perk up in the last few scans. So something that we had also noted that, you know, as these storms have kind of continued along this eastern trajectory, we have started to see some of those showing signs of intensification. Whether or not that just means maybe a bit more lightning, some heavier rainfall, some stronger winds, or even the potential for some rotation and a tornado to develop. That's yet to be determined, but it does look like some of these storms, as they move into and through Tangipahoa and then eventually into Washington, some of them have been intensifying. So this is not a threat that's going to end anytime soon, as we were also showing that wider scale scan. We still have the storms that are kind of north of Baton Rouge and will continue along the northern Florida parishes for the next probably couple of hours.
Yeah, Chris, I was just thinking, this is an impressive cell. This is the same tornadic cell that started in Texas this morning when I was on air at 4:30. It went south of Alexandria, and they think it produced a tornado all the way over in that part of Louisiana, and it has traveled east all day long, and it is just now getting to Washington Parish, and here we go. It's still trying to rotate and perhaps produce tornadoes. So it's pretty impressive for a December cell to travel all the way across the state, kind of maintain itself, and then now, you know, it's trying to rotate. It's still messy though, and this is what Chris and I were talking about earlier on. Radar indicated that when you look at the radar, remember the radar shoots up into the atmosphere, so we're sampling thousands of feet up into the storm right now, and that tells us that there's certainly broad mid-level rotation, but it's just how much of that is reaching the surface. So we issue these, or the National Weather Service issues these warnings to be safe and to tell you that if it's not producing a tornado right now, it could at any moment, and you need to be in your tornado safe spot. So especially towards Franklin, it's getting close to town. At least the rotation, there's Franklinton, there's Richardson, and it's going to be there. It's going to be right where this little inflow notch is. These are winds coming out. These are going to be winds coming into the storm, and that's where your center of rotation is going to be, right along Highway 10, going towards the east. So here's just a timeline. Getting close to Richardson by 1:47, Franklinton by 1:56, the Riverside Medical Center in Franklinton around 1:57. We're talking Franklin High School around 2 p.m. and then Jenkins 2 p.m. and Franklinton. In Franklinton, generally around 2 o'clock is what that timing looks like at this point. Now,
we do have a new, not a warning, but just another severe or strong thunderstorm will be impacting parts of St. Helena, northeastern Livingston, southeastern East Feliciana, northeastern East Baton Rouge. So these are all the same storms that we have been talking about, kind of developing along the line in the northern Florida parishes. So this is well north of Baton Rouge, north of St. Tammany Parish, and really more for central and northern Tangi over the next couple of hours. And these storms continue to move along this eastern trajectory. Not all of them are going to become severe, but we have seen over the last hour or so is that these storms have been intensifying. So regardless if you see or if we do see any rotation that would indicate a tornado developing, you are going to see some very intense rainfall, certainly some gusty winds. And hey, gusty winds, even 45 plus miles an hour, can still do some damage, usually minor, but we're also talking about areas, especially in the more western Florida parishes, that received damage from Ida a few months ago and still have the blue tarps, the blue roofs. And this is some kind of, this is a type of wind speed that could produce some damage to those blue tarps. So something that we don't want to take lightly. It's certainly not anything that we, again, we're not really in the heart of our severe weather season, but we're in kind of a sub-severe weather season. The fall into early winter for us can also produce some severe weather, especially considering we have been so warm and so humid over the last few days. We have a very unstable atmosphere. The last several cold fronts that have moved through over the past several weeks usually were kind of moving into a fairly stable environment. We might have seen a brief warm up, maybe a little bit more humid, but not the instability that we have set up over us at the moment. That's why this front is packing a little bit more of a punch as it moves into the area. So this is out ahead of, and then along the front, we are expecting some of these more severe storms to move on through. That's why this cold front is a little different than several of the ones in the past, say, month and a half or so, as this front is moving to a far more unstable atmosphere. Temperatures in the 80s, much higher humidity. That's a lot more for the atmosphere to work with in order to produce some of these stronger storms, and some of those storms become severe. As we continue to look at this tornado warning, let's see, they're just issuing severe thunderstorm warning coming out for the storm in St. Helena, Livingston, the one I was just talking about. They're talking about a tornado tag. In other words, there is the potential. The Weather Service is not seeing it at the moment, but they usually will at least mention the fact that there is that possibility. So not to be surprised if a severe thunderstorm warning were to become a tornado warning. But this warning is for, at the moment, just outside of our viewing area, Livingston and St. Helena. But that, too, will be moving toward Tangipahoa Parish very shortly. Now, as speaking of the tornado warning that we still have, and again, not to make any light of this, but the rotation here just seems to be very, very sloppy. You don't really see that very well closed, and it did in some of the earlier scans when we came on the air. It certainly looked far better defined than it does at the moment. So I think usually the Weather Service, again, just to err on the side of caution, will probably keep this tornado warning up for a while longer. Unless this just completely appears to dissipate, they're probably going to keep that warning going for a while longer.
Yeah, the winds are certainly coming on out. This is the winds rushing on the backside, and sometimes it can undercut the thunderstorm, and that's probably what's happening here, but there is still generally some rotation. I did want to mention, I just realized, Chris, Boca Chica State Park somewhere in here, and tents, camping, you don't want to be doing any of that in any of this. Even if there's no tornado, there's still likely going to be some strong gusty winds. So if you do know anyone out here maybe doing anything outside, text them, call them. Hopefully they have service. Say, hey, I hope you're aware of what's going on. Just find a sturdy structure to get into as this storm blows on through. But you can see Franklin, from Franklinton and south of Franklinton, still in this tornado warning, and they're going to hold it a little while longer. We'll see what they do. It looks like the rotation's weakening, but there is still some broad rotation in here, and it's going to be right in there near that notch. So getting close to where 10 runs into, getting close to Franklinton here.
I don't know. We don't know the thinking of what the National Weather Service does. They are always going to want to warn on these storms, even if they do look like they're starting to weaken. I'm kind of waiting to see. We have a constant chat room going with the folks over there, and they'll usually kind of give us a heads up on their thinking. If they are about to issue a warning, they'll kind of give us that heads up so we can prepare to go on the air, or just at least run a crawl on screen. And sometimes they'll let us know if, hey, we're seeing kind of the same thing. It looks like that rotation not looking nearly as well defined, so perhaps they will allow this warning to either run its course or maybe expire it early. My thinking is, since it is moving toward a more populated area in Washington Parish, in Franklinton, they may leave this up until this passes through. Once it is over Franklinton, if it still appears as though that rotation is no longer really as well defined as it was, they may allow this warning to expire early, because as of right now, it's still in effect until 2:30.
That's what I was going to ask you, Chris. This is Karen Swenson joining. I've been watching you guys. You're phenomenal. Before, when I was walking in, I heard you say it's getting sloppy. Sloppy is good in this instance.
Sloppy is good. What we're looking at right now is the velocity. What we're looking at are the winds within the thunderstorm. And when you see those reds and greens close together, that means you have winds running away from and moving toward the radar site in Slidell. When you see those very close together and very compact, that usually means a very well-defined circulation, a closed, kind of some of the similar terminology here is talking about with hurricanes, and that may be translating itself down to the surface. When you start to see it become sloppy, in other words, it's not that closed, tight circulation any longer, that rotation, I should say, you're starting to see the colors kind of expand outward. It usually means that the storm, at least in terms of the rotation, is beginning to weaken, and As we said, this is not a confirmed tornado. This was radar indicated. Our radar, the Doppler capabilities of radar, have the ability to see the rotation within a storm. And so if they see that rotation, usually for several scans, the Weather Service will issue a tornado warning, regardless if one has been spotted or not. But as I said, even though it is starting to look a little bit messier, the fact that it's moving toward Franklinton in a more populated area, they may just leave this warning up for a little while longer, perhaps until it passes over Franklinton, and then we start getting into a more unpopulated area between, and not totally unpopulated, but a sparser population between Franklinton and Bogalusa. They may expire the warning, because as of right now, the warning is still in effect for the next 40 minutes. This was kind of what kind of surprised Peyton and I when the warning came out. This was a long duration tornado warning. Usually they don't last for that long.
I think that's why I'm out here.
It might be why, because we
to help us pass the time.
If,
But here's
if it goes that long, yeah, we'll be on the air for a little while longer. But as we've been mentioning, thankfully it is not looking any better organized. And also for the storm that we had been watching moving into Tangipahoa Parish, you can kind of see where Peyton is pointing out. It looks like that too. Maybe a little better defined than the warned area at the moment, but even that is flexible.
And just to let our viewers know that we are waiting on a call from the Washington Parish Sheriff, so we'll get an update from Sheriff Seal in a moment. I spoke with some deputies in Tangipahoa. They said it was storming there, but no reports of any damage that they were aware of. And St. Tammany, which I guess is kind of a little bit deceptive right now because it's not even raining there, and yet we're looking at that giant blob. So what do they have? What's coming their way on the North Shore?
Well, Peyton can better describe that on the end.
Since I've got the map
here.
Yeah, since I've got the map here, if you're in St. Tammany, the threat is currently north of you. The tornado warning is north of you. This cell is going to pass through Washington Parish, eventually get close to Bogalusa, down towards kind of the Sunbush area. We'll need to keep an eye on this long term, but this one will likely stay well to the north of any of I-12, the I-12 corridor.
Good.
The ones we're going to be watching down here closer to the lake are more than likely going to be these ones on this tail end, and they're all merging in a sense. So they were isolated in nature to begin with. Now they're all kind of merging into a line as that cold front comes in behind them. And that's just what we're going to be watching, is this line probably over the next couple of hours, more than likely, as it gets closer and closer to the North Shore and then eventually the South Shore. Now they should begin to weaken. The main system that is fueling all this is to our north. It's quite a ways to our north. So the further that this line pushes away from that main source of spin in the atmosphere and the energy that's fueling all this, they should begin to weaken. So we're thinking the highest threat this afternoon is North Shore, especially Washington and northern Tangi. But as you get further south, that threat should begin to drop. We're just going to have to watch the trends of these. But right now, yes, definitely in Washington Parish. And I've got our system pulled up to where you can text us, the 504-529-4444. I don't want to necessarily go out and take big pictures, but if the storm has rolled through and you do have damage, text us that you do have damage. That really helps us out, or let us know what you saw happen when the storms did come through, but only if it's safe. That's a really helpful tool for us, and kind of eyes on the ground on what is actually happening. We can look at radar, but until we actually have that. So it looks like they did update that tornado
warning. They did
warning.
update it. They're going to keep it in place. They've canceled the tornado warning for Tangipahoa Parish. So for folks in Tangi, you're in the clear at the moment, at least in terms of the tornadic storm. You still have a line of some severe storms moving through with some gusty winds. But they are, the Weather Service, I say they're going to leave the tornado warning in place until 2:30. And again, it probably makes sense because now it is moving toward Franklinton. Not that this storm has had a track record by any means in our viewing area of being tornadic. But certainly, as it did show the signs of far better indication of rotation earlier, we're looking at the velocities. Again, this is looking at the winds. So you're looking at the winds moving. Remember, the Slidell, the radar site is in Slidell, soon to be in Hammond, but it's in Slidell at the moment. So when you see the reds and the greens, that is wind moving away and toward the radar. And when you see them close together, that indicates rotation. The rotation now, to me, it appears to be just about gone. If there is some kind of broad, just within the thunderstorm itself.
What is this storm relative? What is
this
storm relative?
This is storm relative.
Okay,
So these are just the velocities.
Yeah.
And you kind of see but it's really not.
It's more of just the winds coming out at this point.
Right.
That's probably more of a straight line wind threat, I would imagine.
Right. And again, sometimes wind damage is wind damage, whether it was from 60+ mile an hour wind gusts or a weak tornado. damage is damage, and certainly some of the strong winds associated with this can do some hopefully minor tree limbs and whatnot, but we are talking about areas that maybe not quite as much in Washington, but certainly some spots with the blue roofs, the tarps on their homes that can easily get lifted with some of these stronger winds. But in terms of a tornado, I'm not really seeing that any longer just based on the velocities. We switched that over to reflectivity. Not that the storm is gone by any means. You still have a line of some likely very gusty winds. Weather Service is saying they are waiting over the next 5 to 10 minutes to see what the storm does, especially now that it is moving over the more populated area of Franklinton. So it may be that around 2 o'clock we see, if this trend continues, and it has certainly been a weakening trend over the last 15, 20 minutes or so with this storm, we would likely see the tornado warning lifted before their expiration time of 2:30. That was kind of a long duration tornado warning for southeast Louisiana. But it does look like if within the next 5 to 10 minutes or so, based on what the Weather Service is saying now, they may allow this to, not allow, but they may expire this early. If it does look like it'll continue moving over Franklinton with no reported damage, and certainly you're going to have a lot more eyes in the town of Franklinton as to whether or not there was indeed a tornado on the ground. Just based on the velocities, though, I'm not really seeing that is likely.
Well, look at I just noticed all the light. Is there any lightning left in this thing? It had a ton of lightning about an hour ago, but now I just see a few here and there. It looks like.
Doesn't appear.
Yeah, and usually when a storm has an increasing amount of lightning, it usually means the storm's getting stronger, but when you start to lose the lightning, that's usually an indication that it is capped off and it's going to start to weaken at some point, or it's already weakening.
See really very little lightning within. You see a few lightning strikes around Wilmer and south of Bolivar, but that's it really with this more intense line moving into Franklinton right now. There really isn't a lot of lightning.
Yeah, and there is a tremendous amount of heavy rainfall. That's something we haven't seen here in a while. I can't remember the exact date, Chris, on when the last time we even got over an inch of rain in our area. You probably have to go back into October or September, I imagine.
I think it was, September maybe. Or maybe we had one day in October that we had just about an inch of rain.
About an inch, yeah, but it's been
a while.
Incredibly dry. So the flooding risk with all this isn't very high. You know, of course, you get a quick 1 to 2 inches. There's a lot of moisture in the atmosphere right now. This is some very, very heavy rainfall. I wouldn't advise driving in any of it, that's for sure. But fortunately, it is all moving at this point. We're not seeing a lot of training. And right now, we're just mainly focused on the wind threat and for these spin-up tornadoes. And you see these little notches when you look in here and you see these little concave and like this notch here. There's also notches in certain parts of these storms. Usually that's an indication there is inflow. And if you get outflow and all that comes together in the right spots, they sometimes try to rotate and you get these quick spin-up tornadoes. That's what happened with this little cell that is moving through the Franklin area. So if you are in Franklinton right now, you definitely need to be in your tornado safe spot. That broad rotation we're tracking is now moving into town at this point. And you need to be in an interior structure. You need to be away from windows. That is important. And just make sure you're hunkered down in a safe, sturdy structure. You definitely don't want to be in a tent or mobile home or anything like that as this storm blows through. Even if it doesn't have a tornado, it's more than likely still going to have some pretty gusty winds in it. I mean, we're talking 40, maybe 50, 60 mile an hour wind gusts. That can certainly do damage just like a tornado. So you got to take these seriously, whether there's a tornado on the ground or not. There is still going to be somewhat of a wind threat in this part of the storm. There's also going to be this wind threat now getting closer to Holton with this cell. It had some weak rotation, but we were looking at velocity earlier too, and it just didn't look that pronounced, or it didn't look that organized either. The
Weather Service folks have issued a new severe thunderstorm warning. So we've not seen another tornado warning, but that's for St. Helena and Tangi until 3 p.m. From these storms. This, again, kind of almost solid line. It really is a solid line north of almost all, well, it is all the way to Baton Rouge. So within these storms, you're going to find the strong gusty winds, even some small hail, but really the greater threat from any damage would be from the stronger winds that are now continuing across the Florida parishes. And Weather Service is even saying, the warnings are starting to overlap, which does make it a little bit more confusing to the viewer as we're trying to kind of stress where these warned areas are. But really, you can almost bank on this entire solid line will probably have some type of warning at some point within the next couple of hours as this pushes through the Florida parishes, the North Shore, through the rest of the early afternoon hours. Again, thankfully, the only storm that showed really any signs of rotation steadily has been the one over Franklinton, and even that really doesn't appear to be a threat any longer. It is over Franklinton. What we're probably looking at is some of the strong winds along kind of the leading edge of this line moving across Franklinton at the moment. So for folks in Franklinton, you're looking at some intense rainfall, certainly some very strong winds, probably very little lightning. Really only a few lightning strikes have been showing up. Just looking at our scan here, only about 3 near Franklinton at the moment. That is really not indicating an intensifying storm. As Peyton said, these had been associated with far more lightning earlier, so as that lightning number decreases, that usually indicates that the storm is weakening, and we're starting to see some of that heavier rain push more through the town of Franklinton at the moment.
And guys, given that we're joined right now on the phone by Chief Deputy Mike Haley with the Washington Parish Sheriff's Office. Thank you for joining us. Chief Deputy Haley, can you give us an idea of what the conditions are when you're just looking outside of your window or your car or what have you?
Well, I have no windows in my office, but I'm sitting looking at the video of the parking lot, and heavy rain. That's all we have right now.
Well, that's a good sign. Are you getting any reports of damage whatsoever?
We've received none thus far.
Okay. How about you're saying it's raining? Are you noticing high winds?
No.
Okay. Chris, is this a function of it just not getting there at this point? Do you have any questions of the Chief Deputy?
No, really. I mean, what you're looking at right now in Franklinton is really what has been indicating on radar as the worst of this cluster of storms moving through. So thankfully, if you're not seeing those strong winds and you're certainly not seeing any kind of damage from what would be either the winds or a tornado, then it appears as though we can kind of verify that this storm is indeed weakening as it moves into the town of Franklinton. So that's all great news.
That's really good news. And would you agree with that, Chief Deputy?
I'm sorry?
Just based on your observations, does it look like the weather is dissipating?
No, not particularly. It just looks like hard rain, but I see some people on foot moving across the parking lot, with umbrellas and.
Okay.
It just looks like a hard rain here.
Okay, and I did ask you about damage. What about any street flooding?
No, we've not had enough rain for that.
Okay, well, is there anything you'd like to convey to the residents of Washington Parish?
Well, if there are tornado warnings, then take advice and seek shelter until it's clear, but mainly just use common sense.
All right, Chief Deputy Mike Haley, thank you so much for joining us, letting us know that at this point there are no reports of anything other than heavy rain in Washington Parish, and specifically he's in Franklinton. So I guess that's sort of what you expected, and it's very good news that we don't have reports of either damage or flooding. No,
and that's we talk about with viewers, if you can do it safely. We need that ground truth. We can only do so much with the tools available, radar, and being able to depict winds, rotation, but it really is that ground truth. And as you heard from the Deputy Sheriff, in Franklinton, he's seeing just a heavy rain. And, we don't want to hype this by any means, but when radar is indicating rotation, and it certainly looks as though a tornado could be on the ground, you always want to issue that warning and make sure that people heed the warning and just get into that safe place, regardless if there is one or not. Thankfully, though, it doesn't look like, as we were looking at radar here, it did appear that the storm was weakening. And not to say that this is a weak storm, it is still a very intense rainstorm. But as the sheriff also said, we've been very dry. It's some heavy rainfall, but nothing that has led to any flooding concerns. Certainly some gusty winds, but as he said, he saw folks kind of walking through the parking lot in Franklinton, and aside from needing an umbrella, that has been about it. So again, we're not trying to hype these storms. When we come on with tornado warnings, it is not to hype. It is simply to make you aware that the threat is there. Sometimes what makes our tornadoes a little bit, or our warnings, I should say, maybe a little bit different than what you see out in the plains, is that It's a little more difficult to get a tornado to develop down in southeast Louisiana and along the Gulf Coast. So sometimes what would indicate a tornado on the ground across Oklahoma, North Texas, does not necessarily mean we have one in southeast Louisiana. But again, we're always going to err on that side of caution and bring the information. Now, this had been something Peyton and I have been watching over the last now almost half hour, and it really did appear as though as it progressed eastward, it had been steadily weakening, which was then now confirmed by the sheriff's office on the ground in Franklinton.
Yeah, and that area of rotation that they're still watching in this thing that is, you know, it was stronger earlier, it really was. It's going to be right in here, but it's still very broad, and it's certainly not a tight couplet. When you want a tornado visual looking at velocity, you want something that's really tight, green and red close together, and this is just not. But nonetheless, there is some rotation, so that's why they're going to continue this tornado warning for a little while longer. It is now moving through Franklinton at this point. It's probably, remember, the radar is always a little delayed. It's a picture probably of a couple minutes ago. It is now probably a little bit further, and it's moving away from Franklinton now. Still not going to give you the all clear just yet in Franklinton. Stay in your tornado safe spot a little bit longer, but we'll give you the all clear in a couple of minutes. And this is going to continue to be off toward the east. Chris, I did want to look at the that new severe thunderstorm warning. I believe it's going to be just north of Hammond for the Tangipahoa area up towards Independence. That's probably going to be our next area they're thinking that has some pretty strong winds. You've also got that cell, but the cell that's moving out of, what is that, St. Helena and into northern Livingston?
Correct. Yeah, we have so many warnings on the board now, it's hard to keep them all straight, but yes. Yeah. And as we said, this entire line, as it is now moving through the Florida parishes into Tangi, and eventually this will start moving into northern St. Tammany Parish, starting with Folsom. We may see more, hopefully just severe thunderstorm warnings, mainly associated with strong wind gusts, maybe some small hail. Hopefully we no longer see any rotation, but that is certainly still very much possible over the rest of the course of the afternoon. Yeah, and we're talking about this new severe thunderstorm warning. It's hard to see these boxes, but it technically includes just north of Hammond. It includes Tangipahoa, Independence, I believe Natalbany, and every location in between Amite and Hammond basically is included in this new severe thunderstorm warning, and it's going to be for straight line winds, and these winds are going to be bowing out and rushing out of this part of the storm right here. So that's where our wind threat is going to be at its highest, and that's getting close to Independence now. So I think they're calling for what, 60-mile-per-hour winds in this storm. Looked like that was the estimate I could see. That would probably be an isolated instance. But another thing is, I don't know if we can look at velocity really fast. Sometimes velocity can be it can be tricky as a meteorologist to look at this, because the big question is that reaching the ground? A lot of this is the radar sampling thousands of feet up, and the winds are howling that fast, that up, but how much of that is actually reaching the ground can sometimes be difficult to pin down, and it's just, you know, to use caution, they issue these severe thunderstorm warnings. So notice right now, we're querying these, the radar estimates here. Those are certainly not that impressive, right? But within this area right in here is where your strongest winds are going to be if they're actually reaching the ground. So that's going to be heading into the Independence area and just north of Hammond more than likely. And that's why you are under that severe thunderstorm warning. Yeah, I'm just looking at some of the... I was reading that too. We have a chat going with not only the National Weather Service office, but a lot of emergency management, and some of the fire officials up there are indicating they're not really measuring winds per se, but you know, not bad at the ground, and it looks like some of the maybe strongest winds that are being sampled are not even reaching the ground. Fire officials asking if they have any radar estimates, because it's certainly dumping some heavy rainfall, though it doesn't appear as though that they are speaking on any kind of flooding concerns up there right now. So you are getting some intense rainfall. Actually, we can kind of look at some of the rainfall rates that we're getting here from some of these storms that are moving across the North Shore. And just to get an idea of the rainfall rates that we are seeing, how much per hour. I mean, you're talking about some intense storms just south of Amite of 6.5 inches per hour. So these are intense. This is kind of that blinding rain where if you don't need to be out and about, that is not a type of storm you want to be driving through. That's going to reduce your visibility to maybe a few feet in front of your car. So these are associated with some very intense rains. They are associated with some gusty winds. Are they as severe as being indicated by radar? Perhaps not, perhaps. But always just, you know, we haven't really dealt with any severe weather. We haven't dealt with rain in a while. Sometimes folks kind of forget how to handle it. just err on that side of caution. As we said, that warning is still in effect for the Franklinton area. You don't want to get out of that tornado safe space just yet, although it certainly appears as though the risk is gone for Franklinton, and really has been just based on the reflectivity and the velocities, I should say. It certainly appears as though that threat is gone. You know, we just continue to keep looking at what we're watching, the velocities, and it just, you know, maybe some broad, very, very broad rotation there, but probably more than anything, it is sampling that strong wind associated with some of these more intense rains. You know, as that heavy rain falls out of the atmosphere, it drags down some strong winds, stronger winds with it, and just the weight of that heavy rainfall moving down to the surface usually pushes all the wind out ahead of it, and so you are going to get those initial strong wind gusts, and it looks like that may be what velocity is looking at more than a rotating storm. I really think the Weather Service, because they keep admitting that, yeah, it's not looking very healthy any longer, it's starting to move out of the Franklinton area. I would guess that they're not going to leave this up until 2:30, especially as it starts to move into the more unpopulated areas. It looks like it'll probably south of Sheraton, moving away from Jenkins. It'll be moving away, probably staying north of Pine Bluff. And so that they're adding torrential rainfall to the call of action with some of these severe warnings, that they are efficient rain producers within some of those initial bowing segments. So not only are you going to see some strong gusty winds, you are going to see some very heavy rainfall, and they may be adding kind of that torrential rain tag to some of the warnings going forward. As we go through the rest of the afternoon.
Yeah, and Chris, we're talking about that torrential rain. You know, I walked outside this morning. I said, "Boy, it doesn't feel like December, does it?"
No.
The humidity, and they send their weather balloons up, and they were sampling, and they said the moisture content in the atmosphere right now is nearly at record levels, meaning we typically do not have this much moisture in place for storms to work with in December. Yes, in the spring and summertime, we have a ton of moisture for these things, but these are certainly going to be efficient rainmakers to where if it is raining over you for 30 minutes, you may pick up a quick 1 to 2 inches. And fortunately, we've been extremely dry, so we are not saturated in any way. But, you know, torrential rain, you're going to get those typical spots where it takes a minute for things to drain off. So just keep that in mind. But, you know, at this point, everything is at least moving. So nothing is training. It doesn't.
No, that's true. None of these are sitting now. They are moving very slowly in some instances, and you easily pick up a couple of inches of rainfall, but in most scenarios, a couple of inches of rain over the course of a few hours or so is not going to lead to flooding. And again, one thing that has worked in our benefit is that we have been so dry for this fall. We have been really one of the driest on record.
And Chris, you were just asking a few moments ago if people can be our eyes and ears safely.
Yes.
We had a woman that wrote in, or a resident write in from Mount Hermon, texted into our 504-529-4444 number right there. If you can do so, send us your photos and your videos and tell us what time and where they were taken. But hers was a verbal message. They had no damage in Mount Hermon. Now they no longer even have any rain. The thunderstorm lasted about a half hour, they said, and basically thanked you and Peyton for keeping them posted, but all is well in Mount Hermon, where that resident is located.
So, you know, and that's the thing. I'm going to switch over here and show you what folks in the city are looking at the moment, because as we stay on the air here for our neighbors up in the northern Florida parishes, you know, here in the city, it's been just hot and humid. It really has been fairly quiet, but you do see some of the anvil tops from some of those more intense storms over the North Shore beginning to move south of the lake. And as we've been saying, we are not anticipating the severe threat to continue south into the city during the course of the late afternoon and evening. Certainly there's always that risk, especially considering we're in a very unstable atmosphere. That risk is always there. It just doesn't appear that that is going to be the case. Just the upper environment is not really going to be sustainable for these severe storms to continue moving southward. And, you know, as long as we don't see any other rotating storms, and it really is just a threat of some strong gusty winds kind of along the leading edge of these, as well as the risk of some small hail, that usually is something that we can handle. Just want to point out we are still under a tornado warning for the folks just about out of Franklinton now, but for central Washington Parish, switch over to the velocities here to see where that brought you. It looks like if there is any kind of rotation, it is now just about out of the town of Franklinton. Yeah. So we'll likely see that warning polygon adjusted once again to remove Franklinton. let's see, their weather service saying they're starting to get concerned about some of the storms that are lining up kind of an east to west along the western portions of the line of storms, and they may be some concerns of flooding. We're kind of talking about this line sitting up. Consider that the National Weather Service office in Slidell also covers Baton Rouge, so sometimes they'll talk about parts of their area of responsibility is not necessarily the area of responsibility for the New Orleans television station. So they also are focused on Baton Rouge. So it looks like maybe from Baton Rouge into some of the Florida parishes, we may start to see, if this line does not start moving south, let me put this into motion, if it doesn't start moving south fast enough, that we may start to get some decent little accumulations where there may be some minor flooding. This doesn't look like it's going to be a major flooding event by any means. The line is moving. If it was stationary or beginning to train, then that would be a little bit more of an issue. But the fact that we do have some intense rainfall rates, one I had shown you earlier is about 6.5 inches per hour, that is going to lead to a lot of rainfall in a short period, and we know there are parts of our area that it does not require much rain to start getting some street flooding, and sometimes maybe even a little bit more than just minor street flooding. So that may be something that we watch for going forward over the next few hours, as it really appears as though that tornado threat is gone for Washington Parish.
Yeah, and really at this point, you know, what's good is you see how these were all individual cells at one point. Those were a little bit higher tornado risk. Now it's all merging into this line because the cold front is surging in, and I don't know if my temperatures are anywhere in that show. I think let's look at the temperatures and see where that cold front is. But what's happening here is it's all merging into a line. So what we'll be watching for are mainly gusty winds, heavy rain, and occasionally you'll get those quick little spin-up tornadoes on the edge of that line, but they are certainly not quick-lived when those usually happen. So that's what we'll be watching as we go through the rest of the afternoon as this advances down closer to the lake. But this is associated with the cold front, and it's been really warm. We're in the 80s for parts. The parts of the areas are in the 80s. Look at our current temperatures right now. We're sitting at 81 at the airport, 80 in Raceland, 80 Thibodaux, but that cold front is now up around Baton Rouge, and it is going to bring some cooler air, and cooler air means stability, and the more stable the air is, you're going to lose severe thunderstorms. So with this colder air surging in, hopefully it's going to cut off these storms' inflow and they will begin to weaken. That's the hope, at least within the next couple of hours. But you can see we're in the mid-60s up in southwest Mississippi, so it's 10 degrees cooler up here in Mississippi, and then it's even cooler the further north you go in Louisiana as that front is moving on in. So if you are in northern Tangi, once this heavy rain comes through in northern Tangi right now, the severe weather risk is done. Once you feel that cooler north wind, there's not going to be any more severe weather. There probably still going to be some lingering rain, and we're going to have lingering showers through tonight and even into tomorrow, but they're not going to be associated with any severe weather. But wherever you have these warm temperatures, the 80s, the upper 70s, that's that juicy air that these storms, it can be fuel for these storms, so they still have that potential to be on the strong side, Chris.
So yeah, really where you're starting to see the temperatures fall into the low 70s, 60s, certainly the severe risk is over for you because you're losing that fuel source for the storms. And as we had mentioned, that this was a different cold front from the last several that we have seen over the past week and a half, month and a half or so, is that this ahead of the front, we had a long period of starting to turn warmer and starting to turn more humid. So this was a far more unstable atmosphere for these storms to work off of, which is why there was always going to be a greater risk for severe weather, while not a severe risk unlike things we have seen very common in the springtime. And we also mentioned that the fall can bring kind of a sub-severe season for us. It usually is more active in the spring, obviously, but this was a little bit different with this front because we had this longer period of a warming and more humid trend that was allowing for these storms to continue bubbling up. So while we continue watching the storms move through, if we do see any other severe thunderstorm warnings, we will run the crawl at the bottom of the screen. If there is another tornado warning, we will cut into programming. However, as this line is now kind of solidifying itself, it appears though the real risk would be from more straight line winds and thus severe thunderstorm warnings to be issued. But it'll be warnings again. We will not necessarily cut into programming, but we will run the crawl on the bottom of the screen. And of course on social media, Facebook, Twitter, as well as our website, WWLTV.com, we will have all the very latest as we continue through the afternoon. For Karen Swenson and Peyton Malone, I'm Chief Meteorologist Chris Franklin. We will rejoin programming again. We're going to be watching this continuously through the afternoon, but have a full recap on Eyewitness News at 5 and 6.
From Channel 4's Eyewitness News, this has been your local weather expert alert, brought to you by Egan Insurance Agency.
Includes the following benefits: dental, including